Good morning from Toronto. My name is John Kyo, and welcome to the first mini-series of 2021. And in this mini-series, I'll talk to 6, 7, maybe 8 different scientists on food provenance specifically. And today I'm delighted to have with me David Psomiadis from Imprint Analytics in Austria. Good afternoon, David.
Hello, John. Thank you very much. Good afternoon there.
David, in the first minute, can you tell us a little bit about you and also your company?
Absolutely. So my name is David Psomiadis. I am the head of the laboratory and business development manager here at Imprint Analytics in Austria. Simply, my role here is to link, I would say, the science from the lab to the market and the food industry, who are seeking solutions similar to the ones we are offering. So Imprint Analytics is a service provider focusing on offering authentication services through analytical testing. Our major area has to do with food testing and food authenticity. And among our technologies and analytical techniques that we offer, we support our clients also in the area of information and intelligence regarding emerging risks, fraud vulnerabilities, and solutions that may help them use as an added value for their products.
Wonderful. So David, what is food provenance and what kind of scientific techniques are used today?
Food provenance refers to geographical origin of food. That means that in just a few words, we can understand that by thinking the area, the location that something grows or a food product is produced. For plants, for example, this is pretty simple. That should be the place that the plant grew. For other products that they have into their production process some kind of transport, we need to locate the area or the region where the product was really produced, including ingredients or production process. The techniques that might help to verify provenance of food could be multiple. I would say they belong to the area of fingerprinting or profiling technologies. So the method should provide enough information in order to be able to assess if a product matches with this kind of fingerprint or profile as an evidence of proper geographical origin declaration. This could be stable isotope ratios, NMR or NIR profiles, omics, so everything under the area like metabolomics or proteomics, and I would say possibly also trace elements or other kind of multiple multi-elemental fingerprints that they create a snapshot, a picture of the material we investigate.
Wonderful. So then when you look at the food industry and when you're talking to your clients, what do your clients see as the real value of proving provenance? And can you give an example of a food commodity and the type of testing that you would do on that to prove that this is what it says it is?
Right. So I would start probably from describing how a product brings its characteristics over the claims. So we do know every product has certain claims on it. Among them, we find many times provenance, so the origin of that product. These claims usually aim to add some value to the product. That's why these claims are over the products. And origin many times provides this added value, and the manufacturers use this information to attract a consumer. A consumer identifies many times quality or a certain product characteristic through its provenance. Through the time that we experience today, like during the pandemic, we experienced also this so-called food nationalism. So consumers tend to choose local products or avoid products from certain regions. There are also other kind of let's say, aims for a consumer when they choose a product with certain provenance, for example, sustainability reasons, or sensitivities like child labor for a certain region. So all these are adding some value by using certain geographical origin over a product. Examples, I would mention probably the PDO products in EU. So the let's say products that they have this protected designation of origin, like olive oil from Terra di Bari, or feta cheese, or jamón de Huelva. So products that they have been registered with a certain regional origin, because this speaks actually to the consumer and has certain characteristics and certain messages to deliver. But also we know products that they have a direct link with quality, for example, bourbon vanilla. These products, although usually we have or we follow the traceability procedures through certification, for example, to follow back and track their origins, we do have technologies today to verify their origins. For example, multi-isotope ratio fingerprints, or NMR profiles, using databases where we can extract the information and verify origins.
Wonderful. So, David, what are the key challenges then that you have in the area of food provenance? And are there big differences in the testing methods that you would use across those different products? Let's say testing wine versus verifying the provenance of, let's say, even a meat or fish.
For decades now, the biggest challenge, I think, in the geographical origin verification or verifying the provenance of food has been how to establish a proper database of the authentic fingerprint. Any kind of chemical fingerprint doesn't understand of political borders or regional borders. That means that in order to understand what a region means for food provenance, we need to establish and build up a certain database of trusted reference samples from that region. Additionally, we need to understand what is the difference of that region versus other regions. That would be the comparison. And then make even further statistical procedures how we are going to compare a blind or unknown sample or a sample under investigation versus these data sets. And the challenge here includes how one would define the size or the structure of this database, but also how someone would have access to trusted, authentic reference samples if we want to think beyond going to the field and collecting the samples by ourselves, which is not feasible many times. And that was usually a challenge every time when we were trying to build up databases that could be also public or accepted into official methods and standardization protocols. Another challenge would be how we can explain many times that this cannot work anytime or in every case 100%. We do have overlaps, or we do have areas where discrimination of a region versus a neighboring region might not be possible. And in that case, a standardized procedure might not always work. So we need to adapt and develop further or combine methodologies. When we are working between different products, we have to understand that the approach would be different, while the principles might be the same. So building up these databases is our common principle in order to be able to verify the origin of food. But it's certainly different, the fingerprint, even under the same analytical method, when we are using, for example, different products from different levels of the food chain, a plant versus an animal product. And this has to do with the scientific background, how that fingerprint was built up into the certain tissue that we are going to investigate. For instance, plants derive mainly their elements in their tissue from the soil, the air, the water, including or not human-induced factors, while animals derive many parts of their elements also from feed, which have, again, subsequent sources of information into their tissue. And these factors should be considered, let alone processed products or end products with mixed ingredients. In that case, we need to understand very clearly what we need to verify and how we can verify that. Of course, including limitations or some no-goes when a product is processed enough to have problems in verifying its origins.
Gotcha. Wonderful explanation. Thank you so much for that. So David, a quick question. Do you think it's viable for laboratories around the world to work with the large brands to create that provenance database to be able to share it, especially around designated geographic origins? If a product is from a particular region that's designated, is it in the interest of the producers in that region to make that profile, the chemical profile of the soil, the trace elements that are in it, is it in their interest to make that publicly available, or is that something that they would prefer to keep proprietary and verify then later?
I think from experience, it seems that both might be sought as an aim, depending actually on the point of view of its operator. So, for example, national authorities would be very interested to protect a certain industry or a certain production from a local or national product. And there have been efforts to build up a database, even make it public for usage from the interested parties, for example, associations or food producers, in order to show that the provenance of that particular product can be reassured, and everyone is welcome to do that. On the other hand, there are also companies or food manufacturers that they are interested to keep that into their private usage in order to make quality control versus suppliers, for example, or sometimes versus competition, something that they can coordinate by themselves. It really depends on the aspect. The most important is, however, and this I think is a common truth between both cases, that verifying the provenance of food, both using public databases or private databases, is not only a quality control issue. It's not only a way to avoid further problems that might be related with sometimes health impacts from untraceable or products that they are not truly from the place to be. But further on, we have seen or we have experienced and supported companies that they use these kind of procedures in order to speak to the consumer and explain to them that the origin or the declaration of origin of a product is one thing, but making sure that this is true is an additional step that we have to probably embrace if we want to keep that value over their product. The reason is that consumers tend to, let's say, depreciate that information when we don't have enough evidence that this is true, or when we are, let's say, loaded with information of false declarations of origins.
Gotcha. Now, I want to mine into one of the points you mentioned earlier, just so we can simplify this, because the real goal of this is to drive education on what provenance is. And as we know, one of my motivations here is we see a lot of technology solution providers talking about provenance when they really mean the data provenance, or when the data entered the system, versus the geographic or true provenance of the product. So when you look at the product itself, and just to mine into this a little bit in simple language, so we have the ground itself, which has unique trace elements. So there's testing that can be done on the ground to identify its characteristics. That's more of the chemical testing, if we call it, the trace elements. And then we have the genetics of the physical product itself. So is that correct? A correct simplification that we test the ground, we tested the genetics of the product, and we can combine those tests to be able to make it more robust?
Correct. It depends on the method, of course, how we use fingerprints. So, for example, trace elements from soils versus tissue characteristics, chemical characteristics. That could be genetic or not. These are combinations that someone can make connections for finding that evidence that I've mentioned before. And however, there are multiple techniques that they are not using connections between, for example, soil and product. There are connecting natural variations of fingerprints and how these would verify different origins. Or sometimes we have non-targeted, so blind profiles that are not necessarily scrutinized to the bottom line of how or why we interpret that in that way. It's just a profile of thousands of markers that they just describe how a product could look like chemically from a certain region. Still, every technology that uses chemical fingerprints has one principle, that we characterize a region and we compare something versus that established fingerprint. And this is really the difference between data provenance, is that here we are asking the product. So actually the truth is in the product, and this is what we are testing. This is who we ask. The traceability of information is actually a verification. What is the claim? We really make sure that the claim is true as a matter of explaining that the product has come from there. But if the product is really from there, is a story that it's only hidden inside the product. And this is where we have to look at.
Perfect. Ladies and gentlemen, there you go. There you have it. Fantastic overview of provenance in the first kickoff session in this mini-series on food provenance from David Psomiadis from Imprint Analytics in Vienna. David, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning, and looking forward to working with you in 2021.
Thank you very much, John. It was my pleasure.
Thank you.